Hello, I'm Scott Mumford. I'm the Extension Peanut Agronomist for the University of Georgia. I'm located on the Tifton campus, which is in the southern part of Georgia on one of the largest experiment stations that we have in the state of Georgia. Some of the things that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today is, one, the importance of peanut production for the state of Georgia for all the growers. My area of expertise when it comes to peanut production and conducting research trials and putting out recommendations. And then I'm going to follow that up with a real detailed, or as detailed as I can be in a short period of time, about the agronomic practices for high-yielding peanuts in Georgia. This is the result of all of our research trials that we've done over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years that have helped growers as well as help us build recommendations for those growers. And then finally, I'm going to give you a little bit kind of a different view from my perspective, from my support that I supply for the growers of the state, because it's not just conducting research trials and doing recommendations. A lot of my time is also spent on the farm trying to diagnose problems, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And when you look at the peanut industry in the United States as a whole produces its peanuts in the southern tier of our country. And it stretches from the Carolinas all the way over to New Mexico. We are ranked number 4 in the world for peanut production, in which we export about 225,000 metric tons. We produce a lot more than that. Most of those are used domestically. So when you look and start to break down the individual states, you will see that Georgia, which is in the dark brown color, is ranked number 1 for the amount of peanuts that we produce in Georgia. And when you zoom in a little bit and look at the importance of peanuts to Georgia, we produce nearly half of the peanuts in the United States, which means that it's very important for the state of Georgia and its growing. We produce peanuts in about 75 to 80 counties. We do this in what we call the coastal plain, which is in the southern part of Georgia, where the soils are more conducive and the environment is more conducive for peanut production. In those 75 to 80 counties, we have about 3,000 growers that produce on annually about 650 to 700,000 acres of peanuts. Of those acres, 99.5% of those acres produce a runner-type peanut. As you know, there are 4 types of peanut. There's the Spanish, the Valencia, the Virginia, and the runner. And the runner type is what we produce, mainly going into candies and peanut butter. Now let's look at a little bit of my research interest or my area of expertise. For the University of Georgia, I am considered to be the extension peanut agronomist. I have a 90% extension, 10% research appointment. But that does not mean that I do not conduct a lot of research trials. I conduct, on average, 20 to 30 applied research trials each year, which support and update my agronomic recommendations. We also have, as part of that, some research trials looking to look at new technologies or new products that may help us, again, continue to enhance our production. Now, for the most part, I'm looking at cultivar responses. I'm trying to do things to enhance the current yielding capabilities as well as quality capabilities of these cultivars and trying to push them. And so I'm looking at row configuration, tillage practices, planting dates. We also do a lot with maturity, because that is important to peanuts, knowing when to harvest or when to dig them. If not, you tend to lose a lot of peanuts, and we don't want that to happen. Again, I look at a lot of different products that might help us from inoculants that help supply the needed nitrogen for the crop, as well as other growth enhancement type products. But also we look at growth regulators because we do grow a lot of vine under irrigation, and so sometimes we need to go in and manage those or manage that vine growth, and that has helped us in the digging process as well as the harvest process. And finally, I do have a small area of expertise in precision ag technologies. I like the technology, enjoy it. I look at different equipment, whether that's planter or our application equipment. We also do a lot with drone imagery to try to see if we can figure out ways that can tell us information that we can't see when we walk across the field that may help us spot problems or understand some situations. But when you overall, no matter if it's the extension agronomist or the plant pathologist or whoever it might be, when they work with growers, or we really try to devise a lot of our recommendations or practices to help our growers, the number one things that they want to know is what is this going to do for yield and quality, because that is key for them to remain economical and sustainable from year to year. So we got to keep that in mind every time we do go out and try to promote a new product or a new practice on a farm. Is it going to help increase yield and quality? So let's start at the base of any recommendation or any grower's field. What is the number one thing that they need to consider when they're going to try to grow high-yielding, high-quality peanuts? The biggest thing is crop rotation. That is the base. That is the one thing we build our programs off of. Crop rotation is important in peanuts because we are trying to reduce the severity of diseases, leaf spot, southern stem rot, nematodes, whatever it might be that causes problems for us in the United States, specifically in Georgia, as far as diseases. Crop rotation is the biggest key to try to reduce the severity of that. And our recommendations after a lot of research is that we want to plant peanuts in a field no less than 1 out of every 3 years. If you can spread it out, to 1 out of 4 years, that's even better. And we try to rotate with crops that are not legumes. We do not want to mix with soybeans. We want to stay with cotton or corn or some kind of other grass crop. And that will help us manage these diseases, but also manage fertility issues and weed issues and other things. So, again, crop rotation is by far one of the most important things that we try to get our growers to abide by, or at least respect. Tillage. That's often a big thing that growers in some areas tend to want to talk a lot about, because tillage is very time consuming. Tillage is very, very expensive in some situations. But depending on where you're at in the state, we have a lot of people that do what we call conventional intensive tillage, where we're going in and deep turning the soil, versus reduced tillage system where we're using maybe cover and just going in and ripping up under the road, to try to save in trips across the field, labor, as well as just the wear and tear on the machinery. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it, show you some examples. We are about 50% conventional, about 50% reduced tillage of some type in the state of Georgia. Some years we are 60% conventional, but in all reality we're pretty close to an even split there. So let's talk about what are the differences. Well, conventional tillage, like I said, is expensive and time consuming. We're about 3 to 5 trips across the field. We do see increases in yield. We do bury a lot of disease residues, and it tends to warm the soils up. All are important to getting good seed to soil contact and getting that seeds germinate and come out of the ground quickly. So things definitely are a little bit easier to do with conventional tillage, but a lot of times not all growers have the equipment or labor to do this type of work. And that's where reduced tillage practices come into effect. And reduced tillage, again, the best situation is cover, using rye or wheat, and then coming in, killing it about 2 weeks prior to plant, and then going in with a ripper and ripping right where the row is going to be, and trying to do a little bit of tillage right there in that row, and so that we can come in and plant and have good seed and soil contact. Now, we do have lower yields a lot of times in these reduced tillage practice scenarios, but the amount of money that we save in machinery and labor, as well as other energy expenses, kind of levels the playing field when it comes to the differences in yield. Now we got, like I mentioned before, crop rotation. We got tillage down. We know what we need to do, but the third most important part of this is fertility. We need to make sure that we keep our fertility practices at a good, sustainable level for our other crops. If we do that, most of the time we're not going to have to put a lot of fertility out for peanut. Peanut is definitely a crop that mines nutrients very well. But the problem is, if you don't take care of your fertility in your other crops, peanuts are going to suffer, and that's what we have to work with every year. We put out this peanut fertility checklist every year, and as you can see, there are certain things that we want to make sure that that we do. One, we want a soil test to make sure that we don't have any problems before we plant. We want to make sure that our pHs are close to 6 or better. If they're lower than that, we can have problems with fertility availability. We want to make sure our P and K is just where they need to be. You see in the figure on the left-hand side, potassium and phosphorus. That's the pounds of P2O5 that we need per acre. And the recommendation for that. So as long as we have what we need based on our soil samples, we're good. Inoculate, we like to inoculate with a rhizobium bacteria every year if we can, but we definitely need it where we've been out of peanuts more than 3 years. We definitely need calcium, especially with seed peanuts. We're going to grow seed for the next year. Make sure that we take a calcium sample no matter what on that and put out calcium via gypsum. We also are going to talk about boron and then just some micronutrients. So I'm going to touch on these a little bit as we go through. So again, low pHs, the biggest thing here is if we get below 6, a lot of our metals become more available, and then a lot of our macronutrients become tied up. And so we want to make sure that we stay in that at least that 6 to 6.5 range. Same thing with high pHs. If we get above 7, poor nutrient availability, we're going to have some manganese issues. Just some things to think about as we go forward. So pH is a big component of making sure that we do make the best use of the fertility that we have. So starting off nitrogen, we don't test for nitrogen in our soils. For the most part, with our other crops, we're going to put out nitrogen on corn and cotton to make a high yield. With peanuts, it's a leguminous crop, so it's going to fixate its own nitrogen as long as we inoculate or we have residual bacteria in the field. And we found out from research there are several different ways to get that inoculant, several different formulations. There is a liquid formulation, a granular formulation, and then what we call a hopper box. If you can do a liquid formulation, we have found that does a whole lot better and provides more uniform inoculation of the seed. However, we still get inoculation with the other two. It's just not as accurate. Now, if we run into a situation where we have a inoculant failure or they didn't put out inoculant and you get these yellow peanuts like we showed here, there's 2 rows of yellow peanuts, then that's where we need to go back and put in at least 60 pounds of nitrogen or 60 units, and we typically put that out as ammonium sulfate. But we just got to do that. We found that 60 units of nitrogen will produce just as good a crop as any. We can have issues with equipment. We need to, I work with growers a lot, try to make sure that they clean and fix equipment problems. And you see that we got some equipment failure here where some roads are real yellow and some are not. Calcium, I mentioned that earlier, it's very, very important to peanut. We put that out at gypsum at around 30 days after planting, so we make sure there's good elevated amounts of calcium in that top part of the soil, in the top 3 to 4 inches. If you don't have calcium or don't have enough calcium, or we don't get enough rain, and the pods don't absorb that calcium directly, then we have deficiencies, and that can cause pops, that can cause pod rot, black heart, or even poor germination if it's seed for the next year. Boron, that is one product that helps us in the blooming and pod set. We need to make sure we have at least a half a pound of boron per acre, and we typically do that in 2 shots of a quarter pound each. And it also, if you have a deficiency, can cause what we find from time to time as hollow heart, which is the bottom set of peanuts. The shellers do not like to see hollow heart peanuts, because that all gives an off flavor. Now let's talk a little bit about planting. We do planting 2 different ways. We typically are on 36-inch rows. Means that the rows are 36 inches apart. So we do single row or twin row. That's one where you have one planter putting seed out on 36 inches, or you are splitting the 36-inch row 7 inches between the planters to make twin rows. We spend a lot of time talking about high quality seed. If you don't have high quality seed, you can have very bad stands or very erratic stands, and that's what you see here. The picture on the far left is good stand of peanuts, whereas the 2 on the right is where we had some poor quality seed. Now the picture on the bottom right just shows the difference in 2 lots of seed, where one lot was good quality and one was not so good quality. And again, we have skippy stands. And if we have skippy stands with peanuts in the state of Georgia, we have a lot of problems with tomato spotted wilt virus, which I'm not sure that you guys have at this time. When we look at the high quality seed, part of that is the variety or cultivar that you choose. We have a lot of different cultivars that we deal with in the state of Georgia, but Georgia 06G, which is on the far left part of the graph, that is the variety that has the highest yield, but it's a lot of times the highest quality. But we have new ones come along every year, and we do tend to look at these every year, both single, twins, and trying to find the best variety that's going to overtake or take the place of those. Now, planting date is another thing that we do a lot of work with, because in the state of Georgia we have a extended planting window that compared to most people in the U.S. We plant between the late April to the end of June most of the time, especially if we have weather situations. But there is a yield penalty for planting later, as well as some penalties for disease problems if we plant too early. So there's a lot of things that we work with the growers with in understanding the risk of planting dates. Currently, if you are going to plant before May 10th, we say that your risk for tomato spotted wilt is higher than the rest of everybody else, so you've got to use insecticides and other practices that we've put out there to help minimize the threat of the virus. But if you're going to plant after May 10th, we know that we start to get a slight yield penalty as you go forward. And once you get into June, we could see as much as 15 to 20% reductions in yield. So planting date is something that we work a lot with, trying to educate our growers when the best time to plant. And this just gives you an idea, no matter if it's twin row or single row, or the cultivar. So the cultivar is on the far right-hand side. The comparison of single and twins are on the left. Looking at planting dates from April 16th to June 3rd. And you can see that most of the time our yields are about the same from the April to mid-May planting, but when we get to June, we take a hit in relation to the planting date of the beginning of June. Seed depth, again, we want to plant in good moisture, and we're planting about 2.5 inches deep. If not, we tend to run out of moisture fairly quickly, and that's something we can't afford to have happen in Georgia. We definitely don't want to put seed in dry soil. And we are putting the seed about 2 inches apart, and so that would be about 5 centimeters apart. And we're doing roughly 6 seeds per foot of row in this case, in order to get at least 4 plants up and growing. And that helps us manage the make spot of wood virus. To give you an idea of variations between the two row patterns I mentioned earlier, just something quick. If you look at the top image, that's 27 days, and the bottom image is right at 45 days. And it just shows you the difference with twin row being on the left-hand side of both images and single row being on the right-hand side. And you see that the reason that we plant twin row is that it covers that soil very quickly, and it allows for a cooling effect, moisture, retaining moisture. But again, it also helps us with this virus issue, and you can see the picture in the top right-hand corner, and that's very important. Twin row is what helps us, for some reason, helps us reduce the impact of the virus. Now, we also have pest issues we've got to consider. Diseases, insects, and weeds. We've got to manage these throughout the season, and scouting is by far the best way to do that. We've got great fungicides to use. We've got great herbicides as well as insecticides. We can control about anything, but if you don't do it the right way, you can get yourself in trouble, and we can lose some yield. Also work on growth regulators. We have some situations where we grow way too much vine. It gets real thick. It's hard to dig those. It's hard to invert them in order for them to dry. So we do a lot of work with growth regulator, which is prohexone calcium, sold as Apogee or Kudos, and that's helped us. But we can't put the full labeled rate on a runner because it's just too effective, and it will tend to shut the plant down further than we want it. So we're doing a lot with reduced rates for this particular thing. We're also educating our growers on when to use it. It is when we have 50% of lateral section, which is in the far right-hand picture, versus the 50% lap. And some growers kind of get that confused. That we're talking about 50% lap, and that is not what we're talking about. We want almost 100% lap when we initiate these first applications of the growth regulator. Now, one other thing that I do a lot of work with is maturity. You know, we get this crop produced. It's getting, and in Georgia, we're going to produce a mature crop around 140 to 150 days. But sometimes it's quicker than that. Sometimes it's later than that. And so we spend a lot of time working with growers to determine the maturity of that crop. And if we're 2 weeks early, we lose a lot of money. If we're 2 weeks late, we lose an extreme amount of money. But if we're somewhere in between that, either way, 1 week of optimum, either way, we tend to be able to work with it better. And so that's what we're trying to work with growers. And over many, many years, we know that we can take that outer shell off, and that is going to show us the mesocarp. And the mesocarp changes color as the peanut pod matures, and it goes from white to black. Black is fully mature. Now, this is a perennial crop, so it's not going to mature everything up at one time. So what we're trying to do basically is we're trying to get as many with dark color as we can before they get over mature. And that's what these two pictures of the profile board shows us. That as 28 days to dig, they're still not dark, but as they go closer to 10 to 14 days before digging, they start to get a little bit darker. And we can hone in exactly when these growers need to dig this crop in order to save as much as possible. We definitely don't want to get over mature, which is what this is showing. If we get too many black ones on this board, that means they're getting over mature. And if they come loose in the hole and let go their connection to that hole, then when they absorb moisture, they start to sprout, and we don't want that to happen. Now, things to watch for with maturity that can change maturity. Again, extreme heat and dry conditions do affect maturity as well as yield. We can't go off days after planting that way, so we got to keep check of that. And we are about 50% dry land to irrigated acres ratio here in Georgia, and so we've got to keep track of our dry land. Sometimes it matures a lot quicker. Do maturity checks. We do them in each county that we produce peanuts in. Watch your diseases, because again, if you got a lot of disease in the field, we may speed up the maturity of that crop and tell you to dig it a little ahead of schedule if you got a lot of disease. Watch out for new varieties, because again, or cultivars in this case, they tend to have different maturities and they're going to look different. We also have started working with new methods for determining maturity. One of those is adjusted growing degree day units. We know that we need about 2,500 growing degree day units in the state of Georgia to get a pretty mature crop, but this is not always perfect. Now, I've kind of walked through kind of fast, the agronomics of what it takes to make a crop in the state of Georgia and some of our recommendations. I'm also going to just finish up real quickly with what we do at Extension in supporting our growers. And a lot of this is going out to the field and diagnosing issues and trying to figure out what happened. And I'm going to just give you some cases here where we spend a lot of time and I do a lot of work trying to figure out stand issues. You know, is that a germination issue? Is it weather? Is it chemical injury? Is it nematode or disease problems? Or is it hog issues or other animals, deer problems? We have a lot of animal issues that come in and tear up and look for and eat the seed that we plant, so it messes our stands up. But also, growers tend to make some mistakes. I hate to say that, but we all make mistakes, not just the growers. And so we go out and try to kind of work between the people that provide the seeds and the growers that grow them and try to work out these problems. Sometimes they're not problems that anybody causes individually. It's just things that happen. Sometimes we just got to work through those. But we do tend to cause problems ourselves, like I mentioned. Grower mistakes, and a lot of these are related to equipment or the way the grower approaches planting. The top left picture is just speed. The only difference here in what's on the far left of the picture and what's on the far right of the picture of the top image is difference in germination and number of plants per foot of row, just based on speed of planting. From 4.5 miles per hour to 2.5 to 3. The slower you go, the better we are. The top right picture again is equipment, fog tubes of inoculants, so they didn't get inoculated. The bottom right picture is where we planted in hot, dry conditions and didn't irrigate. We had an irrigation sitting there, irrigation pivot sitting there, and we didn't irrigate. The bottom left is where we have got convinced that we need in-furrow fertilizers with peanuts. That does not work. We do not like putting any kind of fertilizer products in furrow with peanuts, because you can see it burns the seed, it causes them not to germinate compared to ones that do. So, compared to the untreated. So, just some things that growers tend to get talked into that's not always what we recommend. Deficiencies, again, I mentioned that earlier. Is it potassium? Is it manganese? Is it a zinc toxicity problem? We do a lot of that work going in the field. Some of them do not hurt yield. Some of them do. The top images, very deadly. That's a zinc toxicity problem where the zinc was high in the soil and we had low pH. So definitely some problems we deal with every year. This is the same issue, and this is where the growers let the pH drop on them, and those areas showed up where we had lots of seeds. This is an interesting case where a grower called me on the phone and said, "Hey, I'm going to send you an image of a field or a picture of a field. Tell me what's going on." He said, "I've already spent, $50 to $60 an acre on fertilizer trying to get this crop to respond, and it is not doing it." And the bad thing about it is you can't diagnose things from an image every time. You need to go walk the field and see what the problem is. And what we found out for this particular field, it was a year where we had 20 to 30 inches of rain during the early part of the growing season, and the soil stayed saturated. This is the other side of the field, still have water on it, and unfortunately, we basically rotted the roots. The taproots off most of this crop. It put out feeder roots right at the soil level, but that's not enough to sustain the crop. And you cannot fertilize your way out of this. And so growers, sometimes we just have to tell them they need to walk away from a field like this, and that's hard to do sometimes. And then finally, the whole package. Why do we do the things that we do? Why do we do conventional tillage where we bury disease residue? Why do we have rotation? Why do we pick resistant cultivars? All these things are important. This is a variety trial that our cultivar trial that we put out in a grower's field. Did not know at the time that he was peanut after peanut after peanut. So no rotation. He used the bare bones fungicide program. In other words, the one that really doesn't provide a whole lot of control. And he did not do any tillage whatsoever. And when we put the cultivars in here, we found out that quite a few of these cultivars are highly susceptible to disease, and it hurt severely. It was almost 70 to 80% loss in yield in these cultivars. Now, the one that's in the middle that's very green, that's Georgia 12Y, it has resistance to two of our major diseases, and it only had about 10% loss in yield, where the other ones had, like I mentioned, 70, 80, 90% yield loss. So it's good to know your situation. It's also good to follow the recommendations that we set forth for our growers, because again, we kind of understand what will happen if we fail to use recommendations and do the things that we need to produce high yield peanuts. With that, that's all I have. Appreciate your time and appreciate the invite to talk with you about peanuts. We always like to share information and try to help everybody out. So if you have any information, please contact me. My contact information is on the slide.